Hello, everyone. For this session, we have with us Corey Demi. He will give a presentation titled Thinking Beyond E-Waste for Electronic Sustainability. Serving as the Executive Director of Sustainable Electronics Recycling International, SERI, a global nonprofit organization based in the US, Demi is a champion of building practical solutions towards electronic sustainability. Spanning over 20 years in the electronics industry, his diverse background touches nearly the entire electronics lifecycle, including having worked in IT support, ITAD, data destruction, reverse logistics, reuse, and recycling. It's his wide range of experience that gives Corey a broad view of the electronic sustainability challenge, simultaneously considering the varied perspectives of many stakeholders. Thank you for joining us here, Corey.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Let me just share my screen here. Can you see that, I believe?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks to the opening presentation there. Thank you, Mr. Murthy. I appreciate that. And I just want to take this opportunity to go a little bit further in that conversation and to think beyond just e-waste management for electronic sustainability. So we live in this great world where technology has brought so many benefits to our lives. It really enriches our lives from education to medical technology, to farming, to connecting people from anywhere throughout the world, especially with the movement of mobile and being able to put up a mobile tower or a satellite and connecting the farthest reaches of our planet together. It's been quite amazing and has such a benefit. And I think we can all agree, though, that what we've seen so far is just this explosion of growth and this demand for electronics and this turnover time and time again so quickly of the technology because it keeps improving so fast, and it has such a great benefit. And we've struggled to keep up with that and to manage it properly. And I think we can all agree that electronics e-waste has ended up in places where we don't want it, where it's not sustainable. And the cycle that we're currently on, as Mr. Murthy talked about, is this linear life cycle. It's taking from the earth, it's making these devices, using them, and then having this problem that we have to dispose of it. We don't know what to do with it when we don't use it anymore. And it's creating this e-waste. And it's a problem right now. And what happens in this linear model? Well, what we see so often is, if there is an opportunity to reuse that product, it can provide a benefit. Used electronics are connecting the world in places, where the new products aren't affordable or aren't attainable. And the used products have an opportunity for reuse. So the demand in the market for certain products of working products creates this opportunity for reuse, and it creates money, and you can follow that through the market. And when there's no opportunity for reuse, sometimes we can take the parts. Sometimes we can take 3 broken laptops and make them into one good one. We can use the memory or the processors or the chips for other potential products, and we can recover the components. And when we can't recover any more components, then we're looking at what precious metals are in those devices, and that drives the value of the recycling chain. And when there's no precious metals left, is there value in the base metals, the copper, the aluminum, the iron? That can sometimes drive recycling. But then, we get into the space where they're low value, they're made cheaply, they have cheap materials, lots of plastics, and then it's whether we can actually recycle it at no cost. Does it just wash? Is it even? And then beyond that, we have areas where it actually costs money to recycle it, and then we're left with the decision: do we spend the money, or are we willing to pay for recycling, or are we looking for disposal to put it into a landfill? And so this linear economy thinking, where we haven't planned for that end of life, is just driven by this least cost principle. It's driven by money. And so, really this cycle of just taking it and making it use, it's just not sustainable. So my proposition is that simply managing e-waste is not sustainable, and this can't be the future. So what is the future then? Well, as Mr. Murthy introduced, and many already know, we talk about this principle of circular economy, where we are taking the materials at the end of the life from those electronics and putting them back into new products, whether it's other electronics or whether it's other types of products. But it's not just that. It's using those products longer. It's making the most utility out of each one of those devices. And how can we get the maximum life and slow down the disposal process of our electronics? And so really, when we think about a circular economy, we can't be thinking about this disposing of it at the end or managing that e-waste. We have to be planning for it from the very beginning. And so that takes a different mindset. And what I would propose is that instead of talking about e-waste, which is really the outcome of a linear economy, we need to be looking at electronics as e-scrap. They're resources, they're materials, and we have to have that conviction to actually recover those materials and to actually repair them and to use them longer. And so the challenge goes beyond just thinking of it from e-waste to e-scrap. The challenge is we're only thinking about that end of life. And the truth is, reuse, repair, it doesn't happen from upcycling it out of the scrap pile. It doesn't happen when it's end of life and we're trying to find things that we can reuse, because as consumers, we use products for a long time. And by the time they get to the end of life, there's really not a lot of opportunity for reuse. But when we think about the entire supply chain, from the point where we purchase that new device, and sometimes we return it, sometimes it doesn't work, or it's not what we thought it was, or it doesn't meet our needs. When we think about that, and we think about businesses who are refreshing IT assets, usually on a rolling basis, so every 3 to 4 to 5 years, and those assets are higher grade, they're made better, they're commercial grade assets. These are the areas where we get the reuse principle out of it, where we can repair. And and that does extend to our consumer products, repairing things at home as well, being able to keep them longer and not throwing it away when it breaks to get a new one. When the screen breaks, we can fix it rather than trading it in for a different device. So the reuse principle, when we start looking at the entire supply chain here, from the first use all the way to the end, and looking at all those decisions in between, that's what we need to really get to this circular economy thinking. It's not just thinking about the end of life. It's not just thinking about recycling materials. It's thinking about how we keep these products in the life cycle longer. Because quite frankly, a business, a manufacturer wants to sell you a new product. They're in business to make money. And so, they're not going to help us right now to change this thinking. We've got to take it upon ourselves to move the needle forward. But even then, just thinking circular, it's not enough, because circular isn't always sustainable. To recover the copper wire by open burning is not a sustainable practice. We can't just think circular. We have to think about how we can be circular and sustainable at the same time. So when we talk about a sustainable circular economy for electronics, the things we have to focus on is, one, prioritizing reuse. Prioritizing that from up the stream in that life cycle. Two, of course, we have to manage the hazardous constituents in products, the BFRs in plastics, the lead, the mercury, all these things that can be dangerous when we actually take those electronics apart and recycle them. Eliminate the hazardous processing techniques like open burning, like acid baths, like heating the boards to pop the chips and the solder there. we have to protect the planet. We have to preserve our natural resources. We have to protect workers and communities. And we have to do all this to create an infrastructure that we can really realize a sustainable circular economy. So how are we going to do that? One way is through regulations, but we realize that it's a really big world, and regulations take a long time. And typically regulations have historically here focused on that end of life only, not the entire life cycle. And they've focused on consumers, not on businesses who generate more electronics. And regulations are specific to countries, and that makes it hard to work across the world because this is a global problem. It's not just one country's problem. It's a global network, and it can have a global benefit if we do it properly, but it can also, as we've seen, create global harm. So we're all connected in this. And having country by country regulation is not consistent, and it's really challenging to, first of all, comply with every country's regulation, but to get that harmony across all of those regulations. And at the end of the day, it takes taxpayers paying taxes, funding the government to actually fund effective oversight. And we've seen that's very challenging from developed all the way to developing countries around the world. Effective oversight is really a challenge. So what else can we do? Well, there's another way to attack this problem, or at least to get progress, right? And that's through the private market, through standards and certifications. And so when we set the standard for what are those best practices for electronic sustainability, then we can create accountability through certification programs. And through those certification programs, we can start to move that needle. We can start to systematize the standards and get people working in the same direction, to the same standard, to the same commitment. And that's how we get harmonization. And at the end of the day, though, it requires commitment, to those standards. It requires demand for those recyclers, those refurbishers, to be certified to that standard so that we can drive the harmonization across countries and across the world. There's lots of standards out there. And so I want to focus in on just 3 here with the little time I have left. The Senelec standards, EN 50625, are the European standards for electronic sustainability. They go hand in hand, are designed specifically for Europe and for the WEEE regulations. The eSteward standard is really targeted at transboundary movements of waste and preventing hazardous waste from moving across boundaries. And then the R2 standard is the largest standard in the world, largest certification, with nearly 1,000 certified facilities in, I believe, 33 countries now. So these 3 standards are the ones that are working for this electronic sustainability. At the end of the day, though, again, it takes commitment from all of us. It takes commitment from businesses to not use the guy down the street in the informal sector who just makes it easy to take it off for free. It requires businesses to choose companies that are actually meeting the standard, committed to that sustainability, and committed to the circular economy. It requires governments to establish policies in support of that framework. It requires you and I, the people, to commit to that, to wanting to recycle and not just having this e-waste problem to get rid of and to find the least cost solution. And it requires us doing that at every decision in the life cycle of electronics, from when we buy it firsthand, when we return it, when we upgrade, all the way through to that end of life when there's no possible reuse left in that device. And beyond simply managing this e-waste problem, we can start preventing it, start getting in front of it, because right now we're behind it and we're just trying to manage e-waste. We need to get in front of it. We need to prevent it in the first place. We need to change our mindset to where we are actually recovering the resources, where we're actually using these products to their fullest utility and having the greatest benefit from them. So that's where I see the future. And I think that we can get beyond this e-waste management and we can get in front of this problem to actually prevent it. So pardon me, I cannot get my screen to come back up here. Let me end my presentation. Am I sharing? There we go. So just one question in the chat box I'll try to address before I sign off. How do you get standards to become popular among the consumer community? Well, quite honestly, I don't think the consumers drive standards, because you're right, that is a very challenging proposition. I really think business drives the standard. Seeing the value in using certified recyclers and certified refurbishers, I think that's how we can start to change the mindset. Another question, can you please explain further on ITAD? If I have another minute. So ITAD is the process of IT asset disposition. So in businesses, you know, typically these multinational corporations have thousands upon thousands of computers and phones and printers and all these electronic devices that make the business work. And they plan that based on an accounting basis. So they buy a new device and they use it for a planned period of time, whether it's 3 years or 4 years. They're not waiting until it breaks or until they need an upgrade. They have a plan from the day they purchase it. And so ITAD is continuing to manage that turnover or the refresh of those IT assets. So typically these, you know, laptops, for example, are used 4 years, and then they are refreshed with a new laptop from an accounting principle. They're written off over those 4 years in business as an expense, excuse me. And so they have these laptops that are viable. I mean, for you and I as consumers, for our kids at home, you know, to do school, to connect, these are really valuable assets because they're higher grade quality of computers. And so the ITAD community and that refresh cycle really generates opportunities for reuse of those devices in a consumer perspective or in other business, perhaps in schools and around the world. So with that, I will, that was the last question I had. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I realize we have the next panel session coming up. So thank you again, and look forward to talking more.